podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie, and I am here to talk about all things science and tech. I have Susan with me. Hello, Susan.
Hello.
And a very special guest today. Susan, I'm going to let you do the introductions.
Okay.
This time.
Okay. And that's because it's a Norwegian name and you think I will do a better job at it than you will, which might not be true. But we have a guest with us, Ylva Ostby, and she is a clinical neuropsychologist and a postdoctoral researcher in Oslo, Norway. And what's the official university name? Is it University of Oslo or?
Yes, it's University of Oslo.
Okay. And I'm excited about talking to you, Ylva, because you and your sister, right? Is it your sister, Hilda, who together wrote a book? And give us the title of the book.
It's called Adventures in Memory.
Adventures in Memory.
The Science and Secrets of Remembering and Forgetting.
Yeah. So first of all, I think, and you probably get this question all the time because I think it's a little unusual to write a book with your sister. And then, of course, I think writing a book on memory is a great idea. And so I'm fascinated and I want to talk to you about that. There's so much research on memory, and yet, of which I've read a lot. I'm sure you've read even more. But when people have asked me, can you recommend, a book on memory that would be for someone who is, not a PhD psychologist, studying memory, but also not just, a layperson, but something in between, people who are interested in memory, people who are interested in cognitive psychology, people who are interested in human factors, but might not be experts on memory. I haven't had, a book that I could recommend to them because as far as I know, a lot of the books on memory are, quite academic and very technical. So, and maybe I just, am not up on memory books, but is that one reason why you wrote this book, was to fill that gap?
Yes, definitely. We wanted to convey as much of this way so that a lot of people could be as fascinated about memory as we were, and also kind of to look beyond the traditional how to improve your memory view, which is quite predominant, I think. So that was our main motivation to reach out and also perhaps instill more humility when it comes to understanding our memory and what we can expect from it.
So when you talk about understanding memory, what's like the target people? I mean, are we talking master memorizers, the everyday person on the street? What does that mean?
Yes, we want to reach every kind of person on the street. Actually, that's our greatest goal, but it's very difficult, of course. So we've had some great reception of our book here in Norway. That it is read by young people down to 14 years old and up to people of 80 and 90 years, and both people who are into memory science a little bit and people who have no idea whatsoever are enjoying the book. So I think that makes us very happy that we kind of reach a wide audience. And I think that is because it is not written like a standard textbook. I wrote this with my sister, who is a writer who writes she writes books and novels, and so her expertise in making great stories makes all this science come to life in a way that I for one could not do myself.
So what kind of stories? So it's sort of like like you're busy reading science articles, and she's kind of putting it together in a fun way that people would like to read. Is that kind of the dynamic?
Well, both that and yeah, we were both writing. So it's both me and my sister who is writing the book, and it is both me and my sister who are discussing topics and the science and asking questions, and making some of these experiments come to life.
I can imagine there were a lot of, well, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I could just imagine some tense conversations where you would write something and she would go, no one's going to understand what that means. And you'd
Definitely.
say, I have stated it very clearly and very accurately, right?
Yes, that's exactly how it went. It's like, wow, Hilde, don't you understand? I made myself so clear.
I only say that because I mean I have two sisters and I have not written any books with them, but I've written several books with one particular developmental editor, Jeff Riley, who's a wonderful editor, and you know, so many of our conversations with him saying, you know, no one's going to understand what you mean by that. And I'm like, of course they will. It's very clear. And he's like, no, it's not clear. And you need more examples. And I would just be like, ah.
Yes, it's you can never underestimate how poorly you explain things to people, and also not just the explaining part, but also the kind of questions that we ask and the kind of things that we find interesting. Because after studying memory and neuroscience for so many years, I kind of get stuck in these particular topics and these particular ways of looking at things, and kind of forget some of the more some of the existential questions and some other perspectives that I haven't thought about for a long time. So she was the one who could really bring these issues to the forefront and make this book more more existential and more alive and more fun and all these things. And it was also she who suggested that we actually should recreate some of these experiments that we did for the book, like the experiment with the divers that go deep into the Oslo fjord in the middle of winter to try to memorize the random lists of words.
You want to explain that one? That sounds interesting.
Yeah, because this was, of course, common knowledge to me that there was this very famous memory experiment that was conducted in 1975 by Alan Badley and one of his colleagues, Graham Hitch. No, I misremembered. I'm sorry, it was not Hitch. Sorry. Memory. Oh, it's so difficult. But anyway, they were sending these divers into the water outside of Scotland in 1975. And they found out that when the divers were memorizing a list of words underwater, they remembered the list better when they were tested on it, also underwater, as opposed to on land. And so this also is vice versa.
Have you heard of the I mean, I guess you probably have, but there's always the I guess it's the there's so many American idioms here. I'm trying not to use an American idiom, but all I can think of. Okay, so first of all,
sure.
In over there, do you have the phrase "an old wives' tale"?
No. What's
okay.
that?
Yeah, I have nothing but idioms, and I was like, oh god. Okay, so it's basically like this kind of like this like advice you hear that's kind of passed down from wherever,
Oh,
right?
yeah, yes.
That
Yeah.
like the old wives would say, but there's no actually evidence to back it up. So, there was always like the half joke, half not joke when I was in college, in university, that when you when you were studying, if you were drinking when you were studying, make sure you were drinking during the exam, because you're not gonna you can remember it if you're like drunk in the same state. Now, I don't think that works at all, but but this experiment, that's sort of like the same idea,
Yes.
right?
Exactly. It's called context-dependent memory, and it also applies to mental states, not just physical surroundings. But of course, the alcohol is going to be detrimental to memory anyway, so it's not very advisable.
Like a horrible idea.
It's a horrible idea. But of course, you could do it with other things. You could keep certain items with you that you are also allowed to take on an exam, for instance, or small kind of like a special lucky pen or something that will serve as a contextual cue, perhaps.
What about food? So if I like am eating a certain specific type of granola bar, should I like only eat that granola bar? Like, so if I had an exam coming up, I only eat that granola bar when I'm studying for that subject, and then I'm not sure if it would work at that, if it would be that granular. So like how much context do you need to transition into context-dependent memory?
I think that there needs to be a lot of context in order for it to override other kinds of memory networks, because there are researchers who have tried to test this context effect in other situations, in more like ecologically valid situations, as we call it. They tested medical students, for instance, after having studied either in an auditorium or in the operating theater. And unfortunately, they did remember stuff in the operating theater that they had learned in the auditorium. Otherwise, it would be very impractical. So when the material that is to be learned is meaningful and is associated with other meaningful stuff in your mind, then that will override this context effect.
Okay.
So the reason it works with the divers and the nonsense lists of words is that these lists of words are meaningless, and the only thing to associate them is the surroundings.
Okay. No, that actually makes a lot of
sense. So
did
you guys recreate this then?
Yes, we did. We got 10 divers to perform this experiment for us. And it was I was astounded that they would do this in the middle of winter, actually, here in Norway. But they are all year divers, so so they thought it was a lot of fun.
And what happened?
We surprisingly, we got the same results as Badly did in 1975. This was a slight alteration of the design of the experiment, but still it was kind of conceptually the same. And the divers who recalled on land were so poor at their recall skills in that situation, as compared to we did a kind of baseline test before they went into water and tested their memory. So it really worked, and that was that gave me a really good feeling, because there has been a replication crisis in psychology and social sciences that you probably have heard of.
Oh yeah, we could probably talk about that for a couple of hours, because I actually I like some of the refutation of the crisis calls. But anyway, if we go off into that tangent, we may never come back. So was this recreating of the Badly experiment, was that initially Hilda's idea?
Absolutely, because I just explained the experiment to her, and she said, "Oh, I know a diver," and
let's go do it.
Ask her if she would want to go into water and just experience how the experiment would go, and then she said, Katarina was her name, and she said, "Well, how many divers do you need for this experiment? And I'll organize that."
And I could just see, the look on your face, kind of half amazement, half horror. You're like going to do what? So when you guys were growing up, was she the one that was always like suggesting crazy activities for the two of you to do, and you were the one that was like, what?
Absolutely.
So this pattern has been around for many years. That's what you're telling us.
Absolutely. But she's 4 years older than me, so she also had a lot of power over me all the time.
So she was always...
She could just decide when we were playing that I would be this or that, or yeah.
All right. Well, this is good because Hilda was going to be with us today and couldn't be, but now that she's not here, this is good because we could talk about her and she can't defend herself. So, tell us another thing that she wanted to do with the book that initially perhaps you hadn't thought of, or maybe you weren't even a fan of doing, that ended up being in the book.
Yes, she was very good at finding angles and topics, and of course I suggested people that we could talk to who were scientists, but she very much found the important people who were not scientists who we interviewed for the book. Like, for instance, we talked to several people with memory loss and amnesia, and that was also a bit difficult for me because one of these was someone who had been to me at the hospital, and before going through with interviewing her, we of course asked for permission from my superiors at the hospital, but she was already a kind of public figure about her memory loss at this stage. So otherwise I would not have allowed to go through with that. Mm-hmm. But she has some really amazing views on how to live with memory loss that is actually quite inspiring for people. So so I think it's very important that her story is coming through in our book, as well as other people who have some really personal stories to tell, which people can relate to and understand.
So yeah, go ahead, Guthrie.
Okay, so just to back up, for people who may not be, I think our audience is probably pretty varied. So, I want to back up a little bit because I do want to talk about memory loss because it is obviously very important. But to get to memory loss, I think it would be useful to have some foundation about just what is memory, mm-hmm. and then to kind of get to, well, what does it mean? What happens when? I know there's probably many different types, but then what kind of perhaps that we know of is not working in the same way that then leads to memory loss. So if you want to just back up and give like a little bit, like I think a lot of people who are probably listening just don't have an exact idea of even what memory is or how our brains do it.
Yeah. And scientists don't either, so it's still really one of the greatest riddles of science. But of course, there are some basic stuff that we know by now.
Okay.
That, for instance, the hippocampus in the brain is really, really vital to memory. And the hippocampus is a small structure within the temporal lobes of our brains that is kind of inside our heads at a little bit above the level of our ears, if that makes sense.
It makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, and hippocampus is Latin for seahorse. So that's why we have a seahorse on the cover of our book, because it's such a beautiful name for a brain structure and also a very nice metaphor for memory. So So the hippocampus is vital for transferring memory into long-term storage. So we have this working memory that we use here and now, which allows us to, for instance, keep this conversation going when we're using our working memory. And we can use it for memorizing a phone number for a limited time, these kinds of things. But of course, it is the long-term memory we think about most when we talk about memory, and
Sure.
and that is some serious thing going on there. And we have several types of long-term memory. So we have our personal memories, which we call episodic memories, and we have semantic memories, which are the facts, the things that we have to study for an exam, for instance. And we have implicit memory, which is memory for things that we don't have to consciously recall in order to show that we remember. Like, for instance, knowing how to ride a bike, or the way we react emotionally to things without thinking about why we do so.
It's interesting to think, because, I think a lot of times I would consider that a habit. But it's interesting to think that it's actually really more like that there's a memory to that too. Like we're responding to what previously happened. Okay, do continue.
Yeah, because memory is something that is stored in our brain that makes us learn from the past. And that can be in the form of a habit, for instance. Mm-hmm. It is something that is stored in our brain. In the 1950s, it was discovered that the hippocampus was so important for storing long-term memories, and that mainly, or the breakthrough came with the unfortunate story of H.M., or Henry Mollison, as he was later revealed to be named. And within neuroscience, everyone has heard of H.M. He was kind of like a neuroscientific celebrity without even knowing it himself, because at the age of 27, he lost his memory for any new episodes in his life after a surgery that was meant to cure his epilepsy, but instead cured him of memory, so to speak.
So that's that is very interesting. I have a question that maybe you can help me with something.
Are we going to do memory therapy on the spot, Guthrie?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's do it.
This would be great. Okay. So I want to see if you have any guesses as to what is wrong with me. Okay?
Mm-hmm. I'll try.
Good. That's all I ask. And I don't have any real answers, so we're not putting you on the spot.
That, please?
I was just saying that I don't have any real answers, so there is no right or wrong. Mm-hmm. So there are some things that I have an amazing memory for. For example, you talked about facts. That was one of the what was that type of memory called?
Semantic memory.
Semantic memory. My semantic memory appears to be very good. So I can remember weird stuff like, like the populations of cities, or, what, like about, maybe not exactly, but like about what year random things were invented. And I'm very good on a trivia team. Like I go to a bar and the trivia, I'm usually pretty good at that stuff. But there are certain facts that I cannot remember for the life of me. So, for example, if I'm at a room and there are a bunch of people, right? And saying hi to people, I cannot remember their names. Mm-hmm. If they tell me their name, especially through audio, not like writing it down, but if they tell me their name through audio, it is near impossible for me to remember their name at all. However, if I make some sort of connection, so for example, if I put their name, if we exchange phone numbers and they write their name somewhere, or we're connected on Facebook, and there's a connection from them to their name to then like how I communicate with them.
Mhm.
Then I can remember their first and last name forever.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah.
So I have a guess or two as to why that is, but I was curious if that is ringing any bells to you, because I am notoriously terrible with remembering people's names.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
And it's very common, and especially the situation that you told me about now, that you are in a room full of people that you don't know, and you go around shaking hands and saying, hello, my name is Ylva, and what's your name? And afterwards I don't remember their name at all. And what happens is that at this moment we are using our working memory. And working memory has very limited capacity. So when we are shaking hands, we are probably using up that capacity for more important stuff. Like, for instance, am I shaking firmly enough? Am I saying my name right? What is he going to say next? Oh, he works with this and that. That is interesting. Way more interesting than his name, of course. Because names are kind of random bits of information, which is not the other information is much more important. So our brain will naturally prioritize that and just kick that out of your working memory.
No, I'm very, very good with faces. So I almost always remember like if I know someone or not, even if I've just like met them, once a couple years ago. I'd be like, I know them somehow. So that makes so when I'm introduced with people, I'm just so interested about them as a person that their name is irrelevant to me, and I don't remember it because my brain doesn't find it important.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, that's why, and that is true for a lot of people. And there are things that you can do to kind of improve your memorization for names in such situations. For instance, you can visualize something that their name reminds you of, so that I don't know if Ylva sounds like anything in English that you could picture. I don't know.
Nope.
No, nothing.
But my name is Guthrie, and that doesn't sound like anything either. So
no, yeah. So then you could try to do something. You can use something from the way people look, or if I know someone else whose name is Guthrie, then I picture that Guthrie standing next to you and rubbing your hair or something, and kind of makes it a little bit alive. And
are you tall?
I'm quite short.
Ah, that's too bad. Because I was thinking, because Ylva actually kind of sounds a little bit like hill. So like hill, like Ylva instead. And I could pick. So if you're tall, right, you'd be like a hill.
Oh, that would work better with my sister Hilda.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that way our names are a bit similar.
Yeah, I just realized that your names rhyme. Was that on purpose?
No, actually not. Because in Norwegian they don't.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Wait. Can say you and your sister's names like correctly in Norwegian?
Hilde and Ylva.
Okay, so they don't. Yeah. Not even close. Well, but
yeah. But back to the memorization of names. Okay, so this is a technique that I sometimes use, but I have to be very aware of it in order to have any use of it, because when you're in the situation and you're nervous and things are happening very quickly, sometimes you don't really get to think about it at all anyway. And the situation may prohibit you standing there for a long time and just say, wait a minute, I'll just hold on to this handshake for a while I picture you with a lot of cherries in your hair or some rotten eggs falling all over you or something. It's not very socially appropriate. So in many situations, this doesn't work, I must say. So, and then my advice is just to to let it go and accept it, and then ask again later, and show, in that way you show interest in the person, and you say, hello, we talked, I didn't quite get your name, can you repeat that to me?
So just be honest, Guthrie, and let people know.
I always am. I just tell people I'm
Yeah.
terrible at names and hope that they forgive me.
Yeah.
All right, I have a different question for you, which is, and our podcast name is called Human Tech, and so this connection of memory to something with technology always of interest to me, and so one of the things, I was just having this conversation the other day about the research that I think exists, although I couldn't remember, talking about remembering, a particular reference for it, so maybe I've made it up. But the idea that when you, it has to do with like taking notes. I mean, we, like Guthrie and I, we do a lot of user research, and we're interviewing people, and we have to take notes, or students in a class, listening to a lecture, and they have to take notes. And of course, these days, most of the time we're taking notes by typing and not by longhand. And the idea that when you write something down in longhand by writing out the letters with a pen on paper, that you are processing it in a different way or in a different place, or something about that processing of the information is different, and therefore you remember it differently and or better than if you are typing. So is there any research on that, or am I just making it up?
I haven't got any research reference for that in front of me now. So, but I've heard that too, and I can totally understand how it might improve memory, because when we're typing, either it is all like in one stream of movements that are not very differentiated with different words. But when we write in longhand, we are kind of making more different movements for each word, probably.
Yeah, slightly bigger motor movements. Yes. I mean, there is obviously motor movement when you're typing, but it's very small.
Yeah. And also it could have something to do with where you keep your attention while you're writing, because writing on the paper, you kind of at least I kind of look at where I write when I write with my with a pencil, as opposed to when I'm typing on the computer.
Yeah.
I can look up
that's right. That's very interesting. Yeah, when you're writing longhand, you're visually engaged with the words.
Yes.
And if you're a fluent typist, if you're very good at typing, you're right. You might not be looking at your hands or looking at the words on the screen as much.
Well, that's why you can type faster. Than
Yeah.
Right.
But then does that mean it's possible that it means that you're processing the information differently? So, we need to, I'm going to have to try and find the research on that if it exists, and document that. Maybe if anyone is listening to the podcast that knows who did that research or who has done it recently, write in and let us know. All right, now let's talk about forgetting.
Yeah. Yes, forgetting. Yeah.
The other side of
memory.
I
don't want to move on yet.
You don't want to. Oh, I'm sorry, Guthrie. You need some more therapy.
So, no, not for me.
Okay.
But so imagine, if you will, a future writing device that uses a series of radar and cameras to know exactly where your fingers are in real time. And so imagine, instead of writing on the paper, you write with one finger or multiple fingers to write the letters. So you could do this right now to those of you listening at home. Pretend you're writing on paper, but close your eyes and just write your name, but in the air, right? In theory, because you don't have to actually write it on paper or know, that you can write very, very fast on paper. The problem is you don't know where you are vertically or horizontally. So if you don't look and you just write really fast, you're writing over other words. Do you think that perhaps let's just assume there is research that shows that your memory is better if you write out longhand, and it's not because you're typing faster and therefore there's more words per minute, so you have less time to remember or anything, but it's something about the physical motion of the writing. Do you think if you had, if instead of typing everything, you were writing longhand but in front of a computer, and that was like a way to write? Do you think that that would have a similar memory, or is it about the actual looking on the paper or feeling the tactile motions on the paper, where you are on the page, that is the difference?
I think that there are many modalities that could work together to improve memorization in this case. So just isolating the movements could be one modality, but also writing it on the paper and seeing where your notes are in relation to the other things you've written. I think that really could also make a difference, so that you kind of remember also, so the page becomes a kind of context in which you remember all the other stuff together. So but I'm not sure. Someone should do this experiment.
All right, I want to add another dimension to the same thing, because which is the possibility that when you're writing with pen and paper, it's not as efficient as typing, and therefore you must summarize more.
Yes.
If you're going to be a good note taker. And the process of summarizing, listening and then deciding what to write down, right? And so there is an extra encoding. When I type, when we're doing user research and I'm typing, I have a tendency to type more words than when I'm handwriting. And Guthrie, I'm thinking about this because we just recently did a bunch of user research for a client in which I was writing by hand. And then we just did the other night some interviews for a different client, for a different piece of work in which I was typing. And if you look at my handwritten notes versus my typing, I tend in the typing to have more word for word what they said, because I can type, they're talking and I can capture a lot of their exact words. So I am summarizing and processing it less. And I think that might be affecting it, because when I'm handwriting it, I'm doing more encoding.
Yes, I think you have a point there too, because memory works in that way naturally, that it captures some of the information, and so our memory has to prioritize and make some kind of mental notes. You have that expression in English as well, to take a mental note of something.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Or, in Norwegian we have a saying that I'm writing it up behind my ear. That is an expression of taking a mental note.
Can you tell us that in Norwegian?
Jeg skriver det opp bak øret.
Okay. Just for our Norwegian audience.
Yes, the huge Norwegian audience.
You never know.
We actually do have some people in Norway who listen, so.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. For sure.
And anyway, so memory is supposed to make the selection of what we experience. Memory doesn't record everything as it happens, like we are doing now with this taping this podcast. So yeah, it's important, and that also connects to what we are going to talk about, forgetting, because forgetting is a very big part of memory in this way. Yeah.
So I should do some, I teach usually one course each semester as an adjunct instructor at University of Wisconsin at a campus near me. So I should run this experiment in my class, where I take, because the students in my class, they take their notes 99.9% of the time on computer and keyboard. And I could perhaps,
or they are simply just scrolling through Facebook.
Yes, that too. But if they're taking notes, they're doing it on the computer. But I could separate the class where half of them, I'm going to talk about a particular topic. Half of them take notes on using the computer and keyboard, and then the other half, I force them to take notes by hand. And we could see who does better on the quiz. Who remembers the information better. But yeah,
that would be wonderful.
All right, so
I want to know the
you want to know the answer. Okay. All right, now here's so talking about strange research we've heard about, and this one I don't have the reference at the top on the top of my head, but I probably can find it because I think I wrote about it in one of my books, about the research that shows that when you go through a doorway, that you forget.
Oh.
Do you know about that?
No, I didn't know that.
And that it even works for virtual doorways.
Yeah.
So that when people are playing a video game, if they went through a virtual doorway in the game, that there was more forgetting. Have you heard that? You haven't heard that, huh? Isn't that a strange thing?
Yeah, that's very strange. It could be related to the same effect as in context-dependent memory, in that you enter a new space, then you kind of wipe the space clean, so to speak, and so you make space for a new exploration or something.
You open the fridge and you forgot what you were looking for. You're on your phone and you walk through and you're like, why am I in this room?
Yeah, there are many things going on then, but that could be. I haven't thought of it like that, but there's these place cells and grid cells in the hippocampus and just outside the hippocampus, in an area called the entorhinal cortex, and these grid cells are firing at specific locations in an environment. To kind of map the environment that we are moving through, and it is thought that these grid cell connected environments kind of feed into memory, so as to connect memories to space, which is an important feature of episodic memories. When you remember something from your life, something that you have experienced. It almost always happens in a space, not flying around in an empty area. So space is very, very important for episodic memories. So the research of Edvard and May-Britt Moser, who won the Nobel Prize in Medicine or Physiology a few years ago for this discovery, they have studied this phenomenon extensively in rats, and they show that when the rat enters a new environment, it kind of starts anew with the same grid cells, can then start to map a new environment. So maybe crossing a door is a kind of a cue to the brain that
to the grid system, right?
New environment. So the grid cells are just restarting or something. So it's very interesting, but this is very speculative, I must say.
So what do you think is some of the most interesting things we know about forgetting?
Well, I think the most interesting thing is a very old fact that stems from the 19th century and the research of Hermann Ebbinghaus from Germany. And you have probably heard of Ebbinghaus,
I
right?
love talking to someone who just puts out all these names, because these are, I have to say that the study of memory, when I first in my learning career in psychology, when I was an undergraduate in college, I got a very heavy dose of behaviorism and operant conditioning, because I happened to go to a school where that was still very much in vogue when many other schools had given up on it. So when I went to graduate school was when I was really studying cognitive psychology and learning all about, all of this stuff. And so I just love all this. So it's great. Yes, I know who Ebbinghaus is, and it's great to talk to someone who does. Guthrie, of course, you know who Ebbinghaus is, right? No. He forgot.
Ebbinghaus, yeah.
Yeah.
Ebbinghaus, yeah.
Ebbinghaus, yeah.
It's somewhere deep inside your memory somewhere.
Probably not. Okay,
Yeah.
So tell us what you're going to say, Ylva.
Yeah, well, Ebbinghaus was he was the father of modern memory research, actually, and by studying forgetting. And he set a task of trying to find out what happens to memories over time and how fast do we forget. So he devised this very special system that he applied to himself. Because this task was enormous. So I think he understood that he could not possibly ask anyone else to do this for him, like we do today. We recruit research subjects to memorize stuff, and then we measure their memory. But Ebbinghaus, he did all this to himself. And what he did was that he devised this nonsense word system made out of one-syllable nonsense words that had no meaning to him in any language that he knew. And then he devised these long lists of these nonsense words and randomly. And then he started to memorize them. And he measured how long it took him to memorize the list in the first place. And then he measured how long it took him to relearn the list again later, after various time intervals. So he did this for quite a lot of time. Like 3 months later, he was testing himself for some random list that he had memorized. And it says in his dissertation that he went to great lengths to try to keep very exciting experiences out of his life during the time of his experiments, so that it would not contaminate his memories. So he led a very boring life during all of this. He really sacrificed himself for science, and what it showed was that forgetting is really quick in the beginning. Just during the first few hours and day, a lot of information is lost, as long as it's not something that is meaningful and that you can associate with. So
I just want you to know, while you were talking, I remembered something.
Oh.
And then I went to look to see whether my memory was right. So Guthrie, in my 100 Things Every Designer Needs to Know About People book, page 58 is figure 25.1, Hermann Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve. So I talk about it, and I have a picture of his curve. Guthrie, you will like this. R equals E to the minus 1/5 power. So Guthrie being he has a degree in economics, so he likes all that mathematical stuff.
All the numbers,
so.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because this is, and also what his research showed was that you could actually turn memory into something that you can count and that you can measure in this way, and that can turn into such wonderful graphs. So
that I can put in my book 100 years later. How's that? Or more than 100 years later.
But now I didn't hear you quite that well.
So, yeah. All right. What about, do you cover in your book anything about forgetting and memory and sleep?
We are not so much, but I think we, if I remember correctly, we do mention that sleep problems is often a cause of memory problems, and of course. There are so many exciting there's so much exciting research going on these days about memory and sleep. So both in humans and in animal research, because the way neurons act during sleep when we remember or forget something is not something that is easy to research in humans. So one can study this, how memories are treated during sleep, and that is really interesting. How some memory traces are being singled out to be kept for later storage, to be consolidated during sleep, while other pieces of information are discarded. So it's this kind of active forgetting process that's actively attacks memory traces when we sleep. So that's also important for
And what do you think about the new technology that supposedly being created that would erase memories that already exist?
Yeah. That is very exciting research that is going on in animals at this time, where they can kind of trace where the memory traces are created during a specific episode and then targeting that. I'm not very concerned that this technology will be used in humans because our memories are so complex and they are not kind of limited to one strict memory network that can be isolated in the hippocampus. So mostly these lines of research are done in order to understand how memory works and not as measures to actually tamper with people's memories.
Okay,
but it sounds very cool.
So if a person's memory, we'll just say, is 100 in complexity, what's like some other animals? If you had to give them just like a ball, like is a cat's memory like is it a 5? Is it a 95? Like how much more complex are we?
I can't guess that at all. But of course, this is a very big debate in memory research. What kind of memories do animals have, and how comparable are they to human memories in terms of experiential details and clarity and vividness and sensory experiences, etc. And can a cat have a personal memory from its past where it kind of remembers that time when it met that very nice other cat somewhere, or or the time,
or is it just like a good feeling that it gets?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that based on what I know, I would land on the latter, that they don't have these specific episodic memories that are in their consciousness and tied to a specific time and place like humans have. But of course, when we talk about these memories that are being switched on and off in the hippocampus of mice, these are also they are very simple because they are designed to be very simple, so that they are easy to follow. So it is giving a mouse a memory can be something that is kind of a bit reductionist. It's like it kind of remembers that it got an electric shock to its paws, in a specific cage, for instance, and that is a memory. And whereas in humans, we would call that an implicit memory, like kind of a bodily memory that we don't really need to remember that we got a shock to our feet in a specific area to avoid that area. It's a kind of automatic reaction. So yeah, it's very complex and difficult because we can't ask these animals, how do you remember? What were you thinking and feeling when you remembered this? Did you have kind of like a flashback of that cage and that tiny electrical shock that you got before, or what happened? So yeah.
I mean, it is interesting because like cats and dogs, they can be very habit oriented, so I have 2 cats, and when it's about nighttime, they will, jump on my bed and look at me like, let's go. It's time to cuddle in bed now, right? And so they seem to have some idea of like what the habit is and where they're supposed to be. Or you make the couple steps towards the place where they get fed, and they'll, they perk up and then they, scamper over towards the, the food area. And it's very hard, so clearly they're very smart at knowing the context clues about when the human does the 3 steps to the right and turns in a certain direction. That only happens when it's the food time, and I know it's the food time. So, but what that experience is like for a cat is, I could imagine that would be very difficult. Can I tell you my own personal theory?
Yes, please.
So I have a theory about what an experience is like for moderately intelligent pets like cats and dogs. And so have you ever played sports? Are there any sports that you play? What's a hobby?
Not team sports, but I've done gymnastics.
Sure. Gymnastics.
And, running.
Gymnastics is perfect. So pick any sort of gymnastics move that you can do. Is there one in mind? First of all, I'd love to hear what you guys call, because I did gymnastics back when I was like 8 in gym class, and so for example, we have there's a thing called a cartwheel.
Oh, cartwheel.
Yeah, it makes no sense. So there's like that's like but let's pick one where you're like jumping to a different place.
Okay, or I'm jumping. Okay.
Right, jumping or grabbing at a certain time, right? So so you have like maybe half a second to kind of do the motion whatever the motion is, okay? Now, put yourself in that exact, for me, it's basketball. So, that exact moment when I'm doing kind of a layup to put the ball in, it's definitely mostly automatic, but it's not entirely, you exist like literally in that millisecond of time where you're conscious and you're thinking, but you're not really thinking about anything. You're like, you just exist in that moment. And my theory is that is the mode that pets walk around in all day, all the time. Is just that one, like just in that last little second. And so, so they're happy and they're happy. And they'll catch things, or they're sleepy, but it's just, that's like as close as humans can get to experiencing like what they're going through at all times. So they're not thinking in this meta way that humans are always thinking about, kind of in a meta, where you got stuff going on. They're just living completely like in the moment. So that's my theory.
Yeah. Yeah, you should talk to another Norwegian that is publishing his book in English coming up. His name is Lars Fredrik Svendsen, and he writes about what animals think about. And he's a philosopher, so he uses a lot of philosophical viewpoints to try to explain how life is experienced by animals. Yeah, I think that's.
Does that mean we'd have to
very interesting.
change the name of our podcast to Animal Tech
Yes.
instead of Human Tech?
Because we humans, we are animals, so it's.
Oh, that's right, we are. Yeah.
And of course, we can't stand above animals completely in trying to understand ourselves, because that would be like thinking that we are gods or something. But still, there's this, of course, this need to understand what it is about humans that is different from animals. And one of these things we think is kind of this episodic mental time travel that we have, that we can kind of consciously travel back in time and recreate experiences in a meaningful way, and also that we can use this to make meaningful plans for the future, that we can construct scenarios that allow us to travel forward into the future of possibilities. In a much greater extent, at least, than animals do.
And I do think, yeah, it is interesting to think about, and either looking at it from the point of view of what makes us different from other animals, or looking at it from the point of view of what makes us different from, for instance, robots or other kinds of machines. And I think we often, or it's easy to underestimate how our senses and the differences in our senses interact with things like memory and mental processing. I'm reminded of some of the research on dogs and their sense of smell, and the idea that because I was commenting to someone how I was dog sitting for someone, and at a certain, at a very specific time of day, which was like 5 minutes before the owner came home, the dog, who had been just lying around sleeping all day and doing absolutely nothing, would all of a sudden get up, be very alert, and go to the door and wait. And this was in an apartment building in a city, so it's not like they heard the car coming down the street, and I'm a psychologist. I can't help study, any kind of animal behavior. So a couple of days, I was house sitting during the day and watching this for a couple of days. And, it was like, it seemed like almost exactly timed, it's like, 5:15, there they are. How do they know that the owner has gotten off the train, 6 blocks away and is going to walk in at a certain time? And then I heard this research about the fact that, dogs, we know their sense of smell is so good that the all the particles in the air, the hairspray, the perfume, the makeup, whatever that had been put on in the morning, it moves in the air currents throughout the day in the room. And when the smell changes, or when the, those particulates can no longer be smelled, or something, there's like a sensory cue that means it's time for the owner to come home. And so it might not be at all the fact that they're telling time, it's just that all the odors have finally left the room in a way that, we humans can't tell, but the animals can tell. So I think we have to be careful when we're talking about what animals experience. I think we have a tendency to put our species experiences, kind of extrapolate to all the other species. But it does.
Of course, smell. It's also a very important memory trigger.
It is a very interesting memory trigger, right? And do you want to just
about that?
You have a theory about that? What is that?
Yeah, it's that smell is so specific sometimes, or you can you can trigger a very specific memory to a very specific smell, because smell is not very verbalizable. So you can't kind of put a label on all these different smells so that they enter into a kind of abstract memory network, like you can do with things that are visual, or things that are verbal, or things like that. So that and all these things that are connected to an episode enter into a memory network. And when something matches that parts of that memory network, it can get reactivated. That's how we get these kind of involuntary memories, that we are reminded of things. And so smell is a very specific cue into a memory network that is not shared with very many other episodes in our lives. So I can experience this when I make Norwegian meatballs. And this if I get the recipe very particularly right, it smells just like my grandma's meatballs. And then I get this Proust moment that all these summers at my grandma's house come flooding back to my memory. But not other times when I make the same meatballs, it doesn't work. So
That's interesting.
So I want to thank you so much for coming on. Can you tell us once more the name of the book?
Yeah, it's called Adventures in Memory: The Science and Secrets of Remembering and Forgetting. And it's out Tuesday, 9th of October.
Yeah, I was going to say it's just about to come out. So it can be pre-ordered, I would think, right?
Absolutely.
If people want to go get it right away, they can do that. Ylva, it's so wonderful to have you on. I'm sorry we missed your sister Hilda, and maybe we can have you guys come back on when Hilda's available, and so we can meet her too, and she can refute all the things you said about her, and she'll tell us stories about you instead. And if people want to reach you, what's the best way to get hold of you?
You can reach me either through our publisher Greystone, or you can reach me on email, which is my name with just an O instead of the Norwegian letter, and gmail.com, or through my university website. Okay. And you can follow me on Instagram and see pictures from our tour in Canada and the United States.
Wonderful.
That would be lovely.
So if you would send me a note with that information, I'll include it we'll write a blog post about this, and I'll include the contact information in it. So thank you very much. And a year from now, we'll come back and see if we remember anything about the conversation.
I know I won't remember anything.
I remember the dogs.
I'll remember your face, that's for sure.
All right, there you go. But he won't remember your name, just so you know. All right, thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for having me.